Hey everyone, welcome. We're just going to give folks a couple minutes to join if they're having connection problems, and then we'll get started.
Unfortunately, we don't have lobby hold music, but I could sing if people want.
I do want to hear you do "Girl from Ipanema." That's the
Yeah.
standard, right?
Hold on. Are these slides moving forward right now for you, Tim?
They are.
What is
Spoiler
going on?
alert.
All right. You get to see the whole thing in 30 seconds. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties, folks. All right. Should we get started, Tim? I think we have a decent quorum right now.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's get rolling. All right. What are we here today for? We're going to be building your first SPL2 app in Splunk. My name is Aditya. I'm here with Tim. Do you want to introduce yourself, Tim?
Yeah, hey, I'm Tim. I've been with Splunk almost 8 years now, across different areas. You may have seen me in the sort of app development space, and now I'm the team lead for the SPL2 language team.
And my name is Aditya. I am the product manager for SPL2, and we are excited to talk to you about some of the innovations that we've been working on for SPL2 in Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Cloud. All right, let's get into it. Before we get any sort of agenda going or go into any sort of details, what do you hope to learn from today's Tech Talk? So you should get a pop-up on your screen asking you three simple questions. So where do you guys feel like you're on the spectrum? Are you looking to learn how to use SPL2 to make your life easier? Are you a developer or partner? Or are you just joining because you saw this pop up? You're like, oh, this looks interesting enough. So I would love to see your answers. Where are you guys at? We'll give it maybe 30 more seconds or less, hopefully. All right, I think that is good enough. I'll give people 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3. All right, that's enough. I'm not going to do a countdown. All right, let's take a look. We got a pretty decent split between admins who are hearing about SPL2 application development, want to make their life a little bit easier, or and a half between developers and partners who want to just explore SPL2 for better solutions. And we got a good chunk of people who are just curious. Curiosity is good. Curiosity is a good starting point. We'll see if we can turn that curiosity into some use cases by the end of this tech talk. So let's take a look and see. All right, here's what today's agenda looks like. We have three things on deck for you today. first we are going to talk about what SPL2 is, what SPL2 is made for, why it exists, and where you can find it. So that'll be a little bit of SPL2, and then we're going to go into the features of SPL2. So this is going to be a two-part. One's going to be just an overview of SPL2 capabilities. We're going to do a speed run through all the capabilities, and Tim's going to go into a demo highlighting some of the cool parts of it. And then we're going to talk about the part that you're probably here for is, okay, what can those features do for me when I build an app in Splunk Enterprise? We'll talk about app building with SPL2 as a whole. And then Tim is going to be, again, doing all the heavy lifting over here and do a short demo on building an app using SPL2. So let's get started. Sorry, guys, got one more Q&A question over here. How familiar are you with SPL2? And you've probably heard the term for days, months. Some of you have heard it for years and like, okay, what's going on with SPL2? Where do you guys fall between these four questions? Are you using it right now in the public beta? Because SPL2 for Splunk Enterprise is actually available for you to download, build, and use right now. Are you using it for GDI use cases for edge processor or ingest processor? Are you still in the evaluation phase? Or are you just like, oh, I hear it in the background, never actually used it myself? All right, give it a few more seconds. And let's go. All right, heard of it but never used it is 90%. That is awesome. That means we got a lot of people that we can teach about SPL2 for the first time, and a couple of people evaluating edge and ingest processor. We'll talk about edge and ingest processor shortly. And so if those of you who are not in the evaluation phase or not in the process of checking that out, you can also learn about SPL2 in that context as well. All right, let's get rolling with the next set. I promised what, why, and where overview for SPL2, and we're going to get right into it. All right, so what is SPL2? I'm sorry, 1 second. What is SPL2? All right, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Some folks, if you are in the presenter link, I think we have some technical difficulties here today. If you are in the presenter link, please stop pressing the buttons because we have some clearly some folks who might not have control over the slides who should not. So I recommend please stop pressing buttons right now. Folks. All right, no more button pressing, please. Thank you very much. All right, what and why for SPL2? SPL2 is, first and foremost, a query language, just like SPL, that is a language built for Splunk analysts that supports both SPL and SQL syntax. So if you've heard of SPL2 being a SQL language for Splunk, that's not true. SPL2 supports SPL syntax. It also supports SQL syntax. So people from different backgrounds can come into Splunk and use different ways of writing and creating queries, all within the Splunk context. It is also a development and scripting language that app developers can use. And we're going to be talking a lot more about that. It borrows from concepts that other languages have. And so it becomes a little bit more than a query language. You can actually create kind of programs using SPL2 in a sense. And it is a data preparation language for data administrators. So if you handle data ingest in Splunk, props and transforms, routing data, formatting, schematizing data, SPL2 delivers those capabilities via edge processor and ingest processor, and it's backwards compatible with SPL. So you now have a language in SPL2 that works for streaming data, also for search data, for analysts with capabilities built for developers and admins all at the same time, using one language to achieve all of these things. And the reason we're doing it is kind of, you may start to, it hints at it based on how I explained what SPL2 is. It allows practitioners to not have wide and deep expertise in multiple tools. It's one tool for the job that can be used in data in motion and data at rest to reduce barriers for entry. All right, so different features of SPL2 cater to different users in different types of scenarios. So if you are a Splunk analyst and you're writing searches, creating dashboards and reports, SPL2 is a lot like SPL. You have SPL2 commands, stats, eval, rex, your eval functions, but it introduces a couple of new things as well. It allows you to build multi-statement searches, where instead of just firing off one search at a time, you can chain searches together, and the results from one search can be piped into a different search, and then you can execute each one individually. But it also introduces optional SQL syntax. And that means you can start using commands like group by, select, order by, from in SPL2. And that means if you're coming from a different database background, for example, and coming into Splunk for the first time with a pipe language, you can still kind of figure your way around in your first couple of days without having to go through a ton of new learning. But below the surface, we have a lot more capabilities in SPL2 than SPL has had in the past. And these are things like function declarations, custom functions, imports and export statements, this concept of views that you can export, type declarations, type validation, and a whole lot more. And we're just going to scratch the surface of all of these things today. All right. Where can you find SPL2? All right. Today, you can find SPL2 in Edge Processor. Edge Processor allows you to filter, route, mask, and format data at your boundary. So a node installed on your boundary where you can install software to process SPL2 before it leaves your boundary. Or you can use SPL2 in the cloud using Ingest Processor. All the same capabilities, but hosted entirely in Splunk Cloud right before the data gets ingested into your index or routed to another destination. And where we're going to focus today is in Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Cloud, but Splunk Enterprise is going to be the focus because you can access it right off the bat today, which will allow you to ship SPL2 module files, which we'll explain in a second, to power custom use cases and curate content in Splunk Enterprise and Cloud apps. I'm going to pause real quick over here. There's a QR code on the screen and a link. If you want to, we'll have it at the end of the talk as well, but if you want to quickly access where you can get the build of SPL2 for Splunk Enterprise right now, scan that QR code or copy that link, and we'll be on our way shortly. Again, I will show the link at the end of this slide as well, and this presentation. All right, let's talk about some SPL2 features. I'm going to go through this rapid fire and walk through a couple of capabilities of SPL2, and then Tim's going to help reinforce that in the demo. So if you didn't capture everything on this first pass, don't be worried. We're going to go over it again with the live hands-on demo. All right, what can you do in SPL2? I talked about multi-statement searches in SPL2. When you search with SPL2, you can write a single search statement just like you can in SPL. But in SPL2, you can also name those searches and then create investigations by chaining them together. So let's look at this first $my search is a search, right? Looking at an index, filtering for a status, and looking for an error string in that event. And in a chain search, I'm going to read from the output of $my search and then run stats count. I can run the first search, or I can run the second search, or I can run both. And if I run the second search, it's going to run the first search under the hood. So what I can do now is instead of creating a million tabs for my investigation, I can conduct my investigation on one page. I can do search one. Okay, is this the right result set? Yeah, it is. And then I can go to the next line. SQL syntax. Again, this is optional. You don't have to use, I know SPL is powerful and a pipe language can do a lot more than what SQL can do in many cases. But if you're coming into Splunk from the SQL context, you may enjoy using this as your first way to get events back from your index. Select, from, group by, and there's a range of other commands that are supported for SPL2 in terms of the SQL ecosystem. Functions. Now, functions are really interesting. Now we get to kind of some of the more unique things about SPL2. The way I like to think about functions is like SPL macros on steroids with a little bit extra juice on them. Functions are declarations you can put in these module files that allow you to define a custom command function or an eval function. And the body of it is also in SPL2. And what you see here is function declaration, the function header, top and product IDs by category, and then arguments, source, category, limit. You can also optionally say what data types should be those arguments and outputs should be validated against. So for example, category needs to be a string. Now, that's also optional. You don't have to say anything, and by default, it'll fall back to Splunk's natural loose type handling. But if you want to add a strict data type validation, you can on both arguments and results coming out of a function. And again, this can be commands and eval functions as well. Now I talked about these data types. You can also define, SPL2 comes with a bunch of out-of-box data types, but you can also create your own. And so this is really powerful because what you can do is you can build custom data types on top of types that already exist in SPL2 and that other people have created. So say, for example, I want to define the schema of a field called customer, and the customer field must be an object that has first name, last name, age, email, account, suspicious activity that are each different types. That way I can create a type built out of other types like a compound type in many different ways. So for example, I can say an IPv4 address is a string that matches a particular regular expression pattern. Now this is unlimitedly extensible. You can build on top of things and create types on top of types. And you can do a pretty wide range of schema handling and schema type checking, both at ingest time and at search time, or stream time and at search time, if you so wish to. Again, this is an optional capability. Everything that you do in SPL today, you can just keep doing. But if you want to add more schema tests, that is definitely possible. And now this is where people might start seeing the comparisons to other languages in the ecosystem in SPL2. SPL2 allows for import statements. And import statements allow you to bring things that are out of scope of the current module file you're authoring into scope as you're building an application primarily. And let's say you have field extractions in another app, or you have a report or saved search or lookup with name collisions in another app. And you want to say, no, I want that lookup, not this lookup. What you can do is you can import specific resources from specific paths and say, no, I want lookup A from app A, or I want function B that I brought from defined in a different module, and I want to bring those into this module to use to create my resources. So what you can say is you can create explicit dependencies on different resources, and the idea being that you can actually see what dependencies objects have with each other in Splunk, in the Splunk ecosystem in the future. You can see this export syntax at the very bottom. When you export a search, you get a, You can also, the corollary of an import is an export. An export basically says, I want to make what's available in this module or this file that I'm writing available for others to use elsewhere. So let's say I'm creating a function. I want someone else to use my function, but only after I've tested and made sure that the function is proper and ready for use by others. So once I export it, then others can import from my file and bring that into their scope. Now, a cool thing is that when you export searches, they become data sets that others can search from as well. We call them views in SPL2, but you can think about them in the SQL database world as like a view that's not materialized. And what that happens is, let's say I export a search and I call it clean buttercup data. And I say, hey, Tim, you can go use clean buttercup data to write your searches from. I can define that search as anything. I could remove sensitive data. I could reformat the data. I can do any arbitrary SPL2 that I want. And then Tim, when he reads from that exported view, he only gets the results from that view definition. So he reads it as an index, basically. He doesn't see it as anything less opaque than an index or more opaque he sees it as an index and he can't introspect the index itself to see its definition. But for me, from an admin perspective, I can make sure that he doesn't get sensitive data without double indexing or doing any other strange workarounds. A few more things about SPL2. We introduce a capability of eval functions called lambda expressions. So if you're familiar with lambdas, but then you already know what they are, but they allow you to conduct map, reduce, and filter within the lambda in order to do bulk operations, which is especially kind of curated to JSON objects in your data, in your index. And after all this, like, what if you're like, okay, hold on, this is so much SPL2 going on. Like, I just want to like use SPL with just some of the capabilities that I saw today. Maybe I want to build a function. Maybe I want to do a multi-statement search. Well, good news, you can just literally embed SPL in SPL2. And we have a command called SPL1 for that. And that means you can take anything that works in SPL and just stick it in here, and it'll work for Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Cloud. So this is the fallback that, if you're not interested in learning the rest, that's totally fine. You can just do as much as you want and literally take your SPL and kind of make it work in SPL2. I've mentioned the word modules many times already. So what you're looking at right now is a module file. And if you're a developer or an admin building your app, these are the files that you're going to be able to ship in your app that define the use cases that we're going to be talking about today and that you'll be building yourself. So for example, this is a module built by Accenture. They presented this at Conf this past summer in Vegas, and their particular use case was doing data quality quality reporting. And effectively, they created a bunch of reports that used SPL2 module files to analyze the health and the quality of the data in their indexes, looking for null value data, identifying data schemas that were not compatible with their business clients that they were reporting for downstream. They created a range of custom types and then used these module files to report on the percentage of dirty data or data that needs cleaning in their ecosystem. All right, we went through this rapid fire. Now Tim's going to actually show what some of these capabilities look like, and then we'll get back to talking about building apps with SPL2. Tim, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, thanks. So let's see some of these features in action. That's the goal here. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. And just to give you an idea of what you're looking at right now, so I've downloaded the SPL2 enabled Splunk Enterprise builds, beta builds that Aditya had referenced. I've installed that locally, and I have pulled up the Studio Code extension for Splunk, which is a really great developer tool. If you're not using it already, Jason Conger has a lot of talks on how you could be using this, for example, to debug your Python code if you're writing a Splunk app. But also a new feature we've added in the last year is this SPL2 notebook experience. So we've borrowed basically the Jupyter notebook experience if you're a data scientist or a Pythonista who's familiar with that. And so I'm basically authoring SPL2 modules here, and I've connected to this extension to my local Splunk instance running SPL2. And now I can both author and run searches as part of my development process here. In the long term, we will have like a full-blown experience inside Splunk Enterprise to be able to author these modules. But for now, in beta, we've sort of enabled the APIs to let this be possible. So let's see some SPL2 features in action. So Aditya just mentioned the SPL1 command, which enables you to be completely backwards compatible if you don't want to learn SPL2 right away. So I've another way of representing the SPL1 command is with these backticks. And so you can see this code action pop up. But what I've done is I've just pasted some SPL into this SPL1 literal. And we have this code action inside the code editor that allows you to convert from SPL to SPL2. So if you don't know all of the nuances of the new syntax, we will do our best to convert what you have here to SPL2. So if I convert this, you can see it was like a search index equals internal. Very similar syntax for this command, as you can see, which is great. And I can also run this in my Visual Studio extension code. This runs in Splunk, and you can see some results here. So what else can we do? So here's, again, some of the functions, the custom functions you could be defining here. So here I've defined make field, which is, in this case, going to be used like a streaming command. Another thing I think someone in the Q&A had asked what makes this different from macros. Well, one big advantage is that everything lives in the same place here, right? Like you're not scrolling between some of your search snippets and your comp files to see what for example, what the arguments to this function are. And you can even hover over here and you can see, because I've added some doc comments here, now I can just hover over make field, see what parameters it's expecting. It's expecting this field. And so what it's doing in this case under the hood, I'm giving it the name of a new field. And you can actually create new fields based on this parameter using what we called field templates. So I'm going to create something called new, whatever the input parameter was, fields, and then I can also create a new value based on the input parameter. And this is a string template. So we can run this and sort of see. So I have input foo, and now you can see that new foo field is created and field foo was created. So both fields, names and values, it's pretty handy to be able to do that and create those on the fly. And then you can also do sort of the things you might expect with existing commands, like with stream stats. Maybe you want a more general purpose function that accepts a custom window or whatever the field that you want to be averaging over in this case. And so you can see my mean being calculated here. So for F1, the mean between 10 and 11 between these first two events. If you're not familiar with stream stats, that's how that works. So simple example of a couple of functions that we've authored here and how those look. Something that's really brand new for SPL2 that's not supported in SPL1 is this concept of lambda functions and how they interact in particular with like map and reduce, which are new in SPL2. And so for this example, I have just a few A, B, C, and D fields. And so I can do simple JSON manipulation. This JSON delete command is also valid in SPL. So we've added, if you haven't checked in the last few years, we've added a bunch of JSON manipulation eval functions, and this is one of them. So simple, I'm just deleting B in this first command. And then I have this map function. So what map is doing is it's iterating over a bunch of, in this case, keys in my JSON object. So it will iterate over A, B, C, D. And then this lambda function, if you're not familiar with this syntax, that's what it's called. And it's basically, in this case, like a one-line function that takes an input. So for each one of these keys, B is gone now, but A, C, and D, we will take its value, which is coming from the deleted fields, and then just add 1 and return that array. So map keys will end up returning 11, 31, and 41. We can see that if I just execute the command. So that's map, and you can see map keys down here. And then reduce, it's similar. So iterating over something. So in this case, we're iterating over these values, which we've added, and we want to, in this case, we can commute a sum. So there's an initial value that we can give, which we're starting at 0. Then this lambda function will take our total value, sort of the thing we're accumulating over, which we call ACC, and then the iterator, which is the thing we're iterating over, so 11, 31, and 41, just add those together, and you can see that's how we would do a sum. So this is sort of a numeric example, but what's more common that we've seen sort of with our partners is wanting to do JSON manipulation. Like, in other words, you've got one JSON payload, you want to extract some interesting things and get it to match the format that you want. So here's an example of that. So we've got an array of, and I should also point out, like, one thing that's been really well received is this this data set literal here. So you can basically paste JSON as is if you have JSON data, whereas with make results, I'm sure we've all done this, but you're constantly usually like escaping strings and it looks like this big ugly mess. But what I can do here is literally just paste my JSON in, and SPL2 will recognize that. So I've done that. Once again, we have a couple of maps here. One is grabbing the keys for each one of these JSON objects, and then the values. And then my goal ultimately, and this is sort of based on real CrowdStrike data that looks in a format similar to this. So what I'm trying to do is get one JSON object or as fields so that this key will be the name of the field and this value will be the value of that field. So to get there, I've got this map function. Now what I'm going to do is create a new JSON object, and this JSON set exact command will set the field, the key and the value here. So for each one of these, I'm setting key, the value of 1 in this case, and n, which is the value of the numeric one. So now I have, at the end of that, I have a few JSON objects with these keys and values. And then as the last step to sort of get this into a single object, which we want to look like this, I can once again do a reduce. So I'm iterating over these single JSON objects. I'm starting with, this is the thing I'm sort of summarizing over or accumulating over. So I'm starting with an empty JSON object, which will be the accumulator. And then I'm setting that a new object to have the key and value of 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 when I iterate over each of these. And so I'll have something that looks like this at the end. And then finally, we have this new flatten command. So it will take a JSON object and create field names and field values based on your keys and values in your JSON object. So 1 will become the field named 1. And if I run that, you can see that. Usually comes out of order. Yeah, so we have 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3. So that was a real sort of a dumbed down version of a real example that came from CrowdStrike. You can also do things like check, perform actions based on a field that the type, for example. So we have this a string field, an integer field, and a nested JSON field. I can do a reduce here where I really just want to, if the field, this is a contrived example, but if the field is an integer, I want to be able to add 1 to it. So I'm once again doing a reduce. I've used to JSON, which is a new command in SPL2 that converts all fields and values into a giant nested JSON object, which is sort of the reverse of flatten if you were thinking from the above example. And then using that JSON blob, I'm basically checking, is this field an int? I'm retrieving the value to do that check, and using the eval command for if, I'm setting it to the value plus 2 if it's an int, and otherwise I'm just returning the value. And so you can see I started with 42, and then if I run this, you will now see 44, and then the other fields were left unchanged. So that was another cool example we had recently from some of our customers and internal customers. Finally, just real quickly, I wanted to show you, so we talked about defining your custom types here. So here I can define, again, like fields and what types I expect those to be, and then you can also if you want to constrain your events to only be have these fields, you can represent it like this. But if there can also be extra fields, you can use the asterisk to describe that. You can actually also type the name or the types, name the types of the extra fields that you expect. So here I've defined some web events. So this could be like a sim model example, and then where I'm actually using it down in this function is, so I'm telling the caller of this function that you can expect that the events returning from the function adhere to this type that I've defined, right? And so, in other words, after I call normalize sim, you can be guaranteed that the types are as you would expect. And so this is ready to go. Cool, so those are some general features of the language, and now Aditya is going to sort of introduce what SPL2 in apps look like, and then I'll give another demo of that. So take it away.
Great, thank you, Tim. So you guys just got a crash course on some of the capabilities of SPL2 that we think are pretty unique. But if you're thinking, okay, these are just like capabilities kind of standing along in the ether, how do you actually use these in Splunk? And when you're building an app in Splunk. Now, make sure that as we continue here, you put on your app developer hat, right? If you're an app developer, you know what that hat is. If you're an admin, think about creating like a shell app for your users that you're going to kind of curate with custom content. And if you're in, if you just log into the UI and you create searches and dashboards and not much, this may be some good learning experience to see how apps might be built using SPL2. So there are 3 phases of app development using SPL2. The first step is you're going to author these modules, like what Tim showed, using the Splunk extension for VS Code. And so this is an extension for VS Code that Splunk built that allows you to do a lot of stuff like props and transforms and Python script linting and now SPL2 module file authoring. And so you build a module kind of like what Tim showed over here, and you upload it to your app. And in that, and there's steps to upload the app, but basically you can just press the upload button in the bottom right corner of VS Code and it'll just push it to your Splunk instance. The second step is now you have these module files in your app, but then how do you actually use them? What you do then is you'd create dashboards and reports using SPL2 to leverage the resources in the modules that you exported. So remember we talked about that export command? Export basically allows you to make anything that you've built in the module available for use in the search UI when you're writing an investigation, when you're creating a dashboard or a report or whatever it may be. So you create dashboards and reports using this SPL2 in the existing knowledge objects like that. And then the third step is you just ship the app. When an admin grabs that app and they install the app on their environment, the modules are also installed, the relationships are also installed, and that kind of handles itself from that perspective. So build your modules, build your dashboards and reports using the resources exported from your modules, and then install the app. Now let's talk about the anatomy of an app, just to talk about the relationship between these modules and the knowledge objects themselves. So at the top end, which you already know, you have knowledge objects that they exist today in Splunk. The difference is using SPL2, you can actually define the definition of these knowledge objects with single statement SPL2. And it's a very simple syntax. You just say basically at annotation, basically at symbol SPL2. And anything after that, at least in this public beta phase, will be read and registered as SPL2. And that's all you got to do at the report and dashboard side. But under the hood in the modules, this is where your app design may become a little more interesting. Every app must have a specific module called the underscore default module. And basically anything exported from the underscore default module is what becomes available to use in reports and dashboards. If you don't have an underscore default module in your app, SPL2 won't work in your app in this current phase. That will change in in a future stage when we have a UI for SPL2 authoring in Splunk. But for app development right now, you need that default module and you build it yourself for it to exist. Any other modules you build on top of that, or in addition to that default module, is totally up to you. You can organize your modules however you'd like. Say, for example, you want all your functions in one module and all of your type definitions in another module. Or you can split it by use case. You have use case A in one module and use case B in another module. Doesn't really matter as long as they all eventually get exported through the default module to surface whatever you need to the knowledge objects like reports and dashboards. But at minimum, you just need one module, the default module. Let's take another look at the definition in a dashboard. So I talked about that at SPL2 annotation. This is all you need to do to say that, hey, this search is going to be SPL2. And in this case, we're reading from the view. So let's say in default module, we exported a view, like I talked about before. I say I am the admin, I export a view for Tim to use to conduct all of his investigations. So Tim would write from my view and then do whatever on top of that he wanted to. Every single SPL2 command, embedded SPL1, whatever he wants to do, as long as he's reading from the resources exported. And that could, of course, already be an existing index that exists today. But you just need to say where you're reading from, just like you do the search command as well in SPL. All right. let's build an SPL2 app. So we're going to talk about a quick scenario before we move forward over here. All right. So here's what today's problem is. Let's everyone put on your problem solving hats now. There's a lot of hats to wear today. So today's problem is we have sensitive data in our environment that privileged users should be able to access, but normal users should see a redacted version of those events. If we do this upstream to redact copying and then fork the data to create, index 1 for sensitive users and index 2 for less sensitive data access, we get double indexing, we get index sprawl, license hits, all kinds of issues that we don't want to deal with. The issue is that already ingested sensitive data can't be redacted. Even if we wanted to do the double indexing method, we've been ingesting the sensitive data for years. So how do we essentially create filters over already ingested data? We want different roles to have different views of the same data. So in addition to this sensitive data problem, I want team A to get a slice of an access to this particular data, and team B to get a different slice of access to this particular data. So I want to curate who gets to see what about the events I'm indexing in Splunk. And field filters sometimes will work, but sometimes are not granular enough. So this is one particular problem that multiple developers have been working with us today to try to solve using a capability called SPL2 views. Oops, I'm going to skip this right here. So here's what today's app is going to look like from a solution perspective. To solve these problems, we're going to build a module and ship in an app using a view that defines, that creates a definition to redact sensitive data. So we'll create this view to redact the sensitive data. Then we'll grant users access to these views and revoke access to the indexes. So a quick side note, what you can do with SPL2 views is you can assign role-based access control to the views themselves. So you can say, hey, this user can run and execute this view, but can't actually view the definition of it. So that's one approach we'll use to actually to create this access pattern that we've talked about before. And then the third step is we'll tell our users to write the searches on views instead of on the underlying indexes, because they no longer have access to the underlying index that has all the sensitive data. So just a quick summary before I hand back to Tim. To solve this problem, we're going to create a view. We're going to create a filter using that view. We're going to change the permissions on both the view and the underlying index that the view is based on, so that the view is a run as only view. And then we're going to allow knowledge objects to be built on top of the view itself rather than the index. All right, Tim, back to you. I got my fancy demo.
Let's see what this looks like now. So I'm back in VS Code. So you can see now I'm inside this app that I'm authoring. And as Aditya mentioned, there is this new directory within the default data directory where you normally see things like your dashboards where my SPL2 modules are stored. And so for this use case where we're trying to scrub data and only give access to certain users, I have this sample data module. So normally, obviously, you would expect an index to be used here for the sort of the data that we want to be scrubbed. But just as an example to show off the functionality here, we've defined, again, what we call this dataset literal. So think of this as make results with a bunch of JSON data. And what we want to pay particular attention to is this user key. So this is what we want to be scrubbing. So we don't want certain users to be able to see this full email address. So we want to mask that. How do we do that? So we have this masking module that it creates this view from sample data, which you just saw. And then it calls this masking function and exports the view. So what does the function do? So inside PII mask, we can see that a regex that extracts essentially the different parts of the email address here, and optionally will allow you to have a different delimiter than what is used by default. You may have seen over here, we're not passing that value, so we're just using the default, which is no delimiter being added. Then here's the mask field that we want to insert. in here to replace all of this. And then so we use the replace command eval function here to actually do that replacing on that field. And so you can see, and then that's exported, and that's how we're using it, and now being able to import it in this module. What we haven't done yet is enabled anyone in the search bar to be able to use this view. And if you remember from Aditya's explanation, that is the role of the default module here. So we've created a default module where we import this view, and then export that mass view. And actually, the real magic happens within this, and sorry, now I have this all in sort of a notebook where we were just looking at the SPL2 before. Inside this masking function now, I have, where I'm exporting the view, I have added a notation which we call run as owner. What this means is that, so when the admin installs this app and becomes the owner of this module, we can optionally give anyone who has permission to view and execute the module the ability to run as if they were the owner, in this case, the admin. And so what's happening under the hood is this masked view, which may be coming from an index that the user does not have access to, is now being masked so that, in other words, we're providing this access layer where we can give you access to certain data from the index, but not everything, and we can actually mask the things we don't want you to see. And so we can see that in action if I go to my local Splunk instance or SPL2 enabled Splunk. So here I am in my view. I'm now logged in as user 1, which only has the user role. And what I've done in the background is also given permissions to user 1 for the default module to be able to read and execute that, and also the PII masking module that you just saw with the run as owner notation. So user 1 doesn't have access to the index itself, but I do have access to the mass view. And so I can, if you remember from the earlier slides, I can use the @SPL2 notation, and this will reference the mass view that I exported in the default module. So you can see I do have access to data, but all the user keys have been scrubbed here, just exactly as our goal was, a stated goal. And then just to show you that, in fact, dashboards are supported with SPL2. This is not a very interesting dashboard, but I've just made a simple table here. In Dashboard Studio, you can see that same view. And if you look under the hood at the definition of this dashboard, you can see that it's backed by a query that, in fact, uses that @SPL2 notation. So that's how we've enabled dashboards. And you know, in the future, other knowledge objects using everywhere, essentially, you see SPL, we want you to be able to use SPL2. So that's SPL2 in apps. All right, and what do we have left, Aditya?
All right. What do we have left? All right. We got a couple of questions for you to follow up with first. So we covered a lot. We covered a quick overview of SPL2 capabilities. We covered a architecture overview of SPL2 apps, and we went into a short demo of building your first SPL2 app. So which feature of SPL2 looks the most compelling to you? Now, we got a long list over here, so this may be kind of like a skim and choose sort of question, but we'd love to see from the people who are who've been following along with the SPL2 capabilities, which feature looks the most compelling? Chain searches, SQL syntax, custom functions like the mask PII function that Tim was showing, custom data types like that web data type that was kind of a SIM model adjacent data type, important exports like exporting a view, for example, Lambda expressions, SPL backwards compatibility, which is always nice, right? Or just the concept of a module file that allows you to house multiple related searches, declarations in a single file. So what looks the most compelling to folks right now? We'll give it a few more seconds. All right. So far, top three look to be chain searches, makes sense, custom functions, and module files. Okay, very interesting. So we got the reusability from custom functions. Module files also provide usability and also kind of logical grouping of concepts. And chain searches, which my favorite chain searches. I don't know what yours is, Tim, but that becomes pretty hard to choose after a while, in my opinion.
I'll take custom functions, I think. That's my
All
plan.
right, we need someone to choose module files, and we'll have the top three rounded out. All right, if you've liked what you've seen so far, you can sign up for the SPL2 app development public beta right now. So you can scan this QR code or look at the URL, and you'll have to do two things when you get there. There'll be a survey that you'll have to fill out, which will help us send you a beta license. So that build will not work by itself without that beta license, but you can still download the build separately. So go to this QR code, you got to log in with your Splunk.com account, fill out the survey, and download the build. We have I think we have, I don't know if we pushed out Windows release yet. I don't think we did push out Windows support quite yet, but we do have Mac OS and Linux support at the moment.
We had a question in chat. The developer license is absolutely usable with this beta, right? Aditya, can you check my? I believe
It
so.
is, I can double check on that. I think it might be usable, but we send a specific kind of beta license because this is a beta build. So
Okay,
it will
so we
not be a
shouldn't
developer tag on that license that you get.
Got it. Okay, good to know.
All right, I'll leave this slide for just a few more seconds so people can copy the link or the QR code. All right, quick takeaways, and then we'll go into Q&A a bit more. SPL2 supports both SPL and SQL syntax. It can be used at stream for edge and ingest processor, but also used at search as well. Apps can be built by admins and developers to introduce code concepts as files into your apps that you can then reuse at search time, and lets you do things that you couldn't do previously in Splunk. For example, we just went through that views use case where you can kind of create role-based access control over a view, like a filter over an index, and then share that with your users. All right, a couple of additional resources that you'll be able to access later when the slides are available for SPL2. You can also look through past tech talks like regular expressions in Splunk, a developer identity on Splunk base, and a whole lot more. And we're going to go straight into Q&A. So we'll try to do some of this live, and some of this we'll try to answer offline as well in the chat box. So let's take one question from Tejo over here, and we'll answer it and type it at the same time. So I'll take one, then maybe Tim, you take the next one.
Sounds good.
So just to follow up, is SPL2 applicable for building ITSI content packs also? That's a great question. At this moment, not explicitly. In this public beta, you won't be able to install ITSI and expect the full range of support at this very moment. We'll be working on that in future iterations, but it is supported across the platform. What you'll probably find is bits of SPL2 will work with ITSI and bits won't, because we haven't actually tested support for ITSI and ES in this public beta yet. You can expect that to be in the future, but at this moment, the formal answer is no. So I'm going to type that in the chat as well, and then Tim, you can take the next one.
Sounds good. We got another question from Rich, which is, when I enter an SPL command using backticks or the SPL1 command, can the command also include a macro, also enclosed in backticks? Okay, so I guess the technical answer is, so I would encourage you to use the SPL1 command, which doesn't, which supports native backtick. From a formatting perspective, that would be the easier way to do it. I don't think your question is necessarily about like how to include backticks within backticks. but rather like our macros supported in SPL2 and things like knowledge objects? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, let me actually share my screen and show you sort of an example of that. So I probably skimmed over this, but in one of my earlier demos, I had a rex command up here. Where is it? Sorry for the quick scrolling. Let me try and find this. So you can, I'm having trouble finding that example. Here it is. So if anyone is familiar with modular regular expressions, you can define regex in your conf files and then reference that in various parts of your Splunk deployment. And this is sort of native SPL2 using the rex command. And it's not even using the SPL1 command or backticks, but even within this SPL2 command, I can make references to, for example, in here, like knowledge objects that I've defined in conf, specifically for the Splunk Enterprise use case, because ultimately everything is executing as SPL. I guess we didn't mention that, but SPL2 in the enterprise use case transpiles down to SPL. And so this will work out of the box for enterprise. Obviously, it will not work for edge processor and ingest processor because there's no concept of conf files in those products. But for SPL2 and enterprise, it absolutely will. So hope that answers your question. And I'll type that in chat as well. Aditya, do you have another one queued up?
I do. All right. So Will asks, this looks great. So what's the impact on SVC license of using SPL2? Will, that's a good question. So the answer at this point that we're based on our testing so far is that it's negligible. There is a very small SPL2 compilation load that's added as we compile SPL2. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be running searches against the time ranges that you sent, getting the same data that you're searching for, and that's going to take up like 99% of whatever SVC usage that you'll be consuming anyway, whether it's SPL or SPL2. So we look at this point, it looks extremely similar to SPL, with the exception of using views, and we have some performance enhancements underway for using views at the moment to push down some of the work to the indexer layer. So I'll answer that in the chat, but the short answer is for the vast majority of use cases, negligible. Tim, are you still answering another question, or do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, let me see if I've, this one might be a little specific to a use case, but I'll go into it anyway. So Tim asks about whether Lambda functions will be marked as unsafe, which for certain commands, if you're not familiar with that, there's sort of a list of safe, unsafe commands. So no, it will not be marked unsafe in and of itself. So lambdas are transpiled to SPL as well. And so for like map and reduce, for example, those actually compile down to the for each command. So if you are using unsafe or risky commands within the Lambda, yes, it will still continue to be marked unsafe. But as far as the Lambda itself, no. If you are using the map eval function and that is currently being marked unsafe, this will not change that behavior, I guess. So it should be a one-to-one behavior matching between what you're seeing in SPL now and what you're seeing in SPL2. I hope that answers that question.
I think also the question might be along the lines of like map in SPL versus map in a Lambda expression in SPL2, for example. Like map in SPL operates over multiple events. So it's stateful in nature.
Oh, yeah.
And so that could put some performance or like resource intensive load on the stack. Whereas map in SPL2 is an eval function to be used in the boundary of the Lambda. And that operates on a single event at a time. And so that's not stateful. And the performance isn't really comparable for both of those two things in terms of resource intensivity and app inspect flags and that kind of stuff.
Good catch, yeah. All right, I
Um,
think we're at time, unfortunately. Go ahead, Aditya. I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off.
we're at time, but we're happy to. I mean, I'm happy to stay long. I'll be answering more questions if people are interested. We have a few more that we haven't answered, so we'll wrap that up. But we're officially done. Thanks for joining, everyone. And if you have more questions, keep putting them in the chat. And if not, we'll hopefully see you around. Let us know if you can use that SPL2 beta, and we'll see you. I guess, Tim, while we're here, because we're going long, we might as well keep the Q&A going out loud. So John Philippe asked the question, is SPL2 compatible with custom commands? Is it possible to write custom commands like Python functions directly from SPL2? The answer is not directly at this point, but you can use your SPL custom command using Python and embed that into your SPL2 using the embedded SPL1 command. So I will put that in the chat right now. All right, another question. Can we enable SPL2 in the search and reporting app for all of our customers to run searches on the search instead of using a separate app? Kranti, good question. So you're saying, can I enable SPL2 in search and reporting? The answer for the app development phase is yes, but you have to create that default module in the search and reporting app. The SPL2 that your users and your customers will run will still be single statement SPL2 in the search bar, but you can enable it for every existing app that you have as well. You don't have to create a brand new app to make SPL2 work. You can just add a default module to all of your existing apps as well. So that's a good point. You can enhance your existing apps with SPL2. You don't have to create an SPL2 only app. You can mix SPL and SPL2 if you want. Let's see. And then Tomas asks, maybe too early to ask, but any plans to do any sort of SPL2 AI assistant, like a LLM or Copilot? And I think the answer is yes, that is a little bit too early to ask, but that is probably in our medium to long-term roadmap. At this point, there's no such tool that exists or no such plan in action. All right, I think that is all the open questions at the moment. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you around.